Sometimes leadership is hard because people are different. They need different things. They want different things. They have different goals, different aspirations. And why does that make your job as a leader difficult?
It makes my job difficult because I have to be attuned to all of those things to help make sure that they have the right set of circumstances to be successful. Help them identify their weaknesses as well as play up their strengths.
Love it. Everybody agree with that? That's hard, isn't it?
It takes a lot of time.
Yes, thank you. That's one of the reasons why it's hard. It's time. And that's why it has to be purposeful. Because we know, right, that time is hard to find in organizations. I have meeting after meeting after meeting, results orientation. I got my boss saying, where's this project? Where's this report? How come we didn't meet this number? And yet somewhere in all of that, I'm supposed to find time to care about people. Because that's really what we're talking about. Right? It's not just another employee, it's an individual that does have real dreams and aspirations for themselves, for their family. Right? And your job is to champion their success no matter where they want to go. Doesn't even have to be within the company, does it? That's the crazy thing about leadership. Right? And therefore, it's one of those things when it becomes so hard, we have to want to do it, don't we? Because if you're forced to do it, it's going to feel off kilter to everybody. Worse yet, it won't happen. Has anybody ever had one-on-ones that were supposed to be every week or every 2 weeks or every month, and you're supposed to talk about you and your development, where you want to go, and you realize after 6 months you've never met once? Maybe you've been the leader that cancels them, as I have a few times, too many times in my career. Right? But what is more important than having a one-on-one with your team member? What is more important than having that meeting that says, I care, and I'm here to champion your success and get you where you want to go? Another business meeting is more important than that? That's the kind of stuff that we have to challenge ourselves on. And that's why it comes back to leadership as a choice that you must make every day. I choose to be a leader or I don't. In my behavior, where I purposely spend my time, right, doing the heavy lifting. Right? Everybody buy into that? Everybody buy into leadership at home? You're a leader at home? Just the same, right? We have to champion those that we love as well. It's the same thing. When I walk through the door, I have to choose to be an extraordinary dad or just an ordinary dad to my 4 children. Right? It's been a long day. Don't I get an excuse to say, I just want to be ordinary tonight. I'm just going to come in and rest and just tell people not to bother me. Right? Well, that's not acceptable. And yet too many nights I find myself wanting to do that. Right? So it's the same thing. When we go home, we have to choose to be an extraordinary parent, an extraordinary spouse. Because is ordinary ever optional? Of course, it's going to happen. Right? But in leadership, we got to make sure that our A game stays up. Now, how do we do that? So one of the things that we know is when we study extraordinary leaders and those that really do inspire and influence and impact those that they serve, there's 3 common traits that they all have. Right? This is where it's going to get extremely common sense, because the first thing we're going to find is that all of these leaders, they care. They genuinely care. Here's where it gets even more simplistic. They believe in others. And last, they possess altruistic goals. There's an aspect of I'm here because I just want to give. I just want to serve. I'm not expecting anything in return. I'm so sorry. Keep walking back and forth. I think I'll just sit in the corner here. Care, belief, altruistic model. We call this the CBA model of leadership. But here's the cool thing that we were able to dig down a little bit deeper on this. And we say, let's actionize this. What does care look like? So care, Captain Obvious B, saying that, of course we care. Well, what does that mean? And more importantly, right, if we had a day-long program, I'd be asking you, how do you visibly care about everybody you serve? How do you visibly care every day? How do you show that? It's not about telling. After 25 years of marriage, if all I did was just tell my wife that I love her, eventually she'd say, okay, I need a little bit more. Right? We all do. Isn't it true of our leaders too? We just don't want to constantly hear them say, look, you're doing a great job. I care about you. I believe in you. Now go get that project done. At some point, we need something more. We need something that tells us to believe in that leader, that they truly have our best interest at heart. And that's what extraordinary leaders do. They find a way to put those trust deposits in the bank so that you walk out of that relationship knowing that they genuinely care about you. So the question that I leave you with there is, how do you visibly care every day? You could write down the names of every direct report and just list out some things that you do, or maybe that you don't do. This is an intentional act. Time is going to get away from you. Sometimes we just assume people know that we care. Of course they know I care about them. And this exercise is great for home. How do you visibly care about those that you love at home? How do you show it? Mother Teresa has one of the best definitions, I think, of care, and that is the level of effort put into the activity to show that you care. And if you unpackage that, it's so true. Right? We could just look at the idea of thank you cards versus email. We've talked about that in academia forever and the difference, and how we tend to put up handwritten thank you cards on our refrigerator and we keep them in a box, and I have a whole box for 20 years that I just can't bring myself to throw out. I don't know why. And yet there's an attachment. But I don't think I've ever posted one email up on my refrigerator that said, "Great job, appreciate all that you do." Why is that? What's the brain science tell us behind that? What do you think? Why is it that we care more about handwritten cards than we do emails? They both say the same thing. Effort. You can touch it. It's tangible, right? Do we not know that somebody had to go to the store, secure the card, sit down and write it out for us and put some thought into it? Handwritten means a little bit more, right? That's part of the effort. So the next time you just want to send a quick email because you're too busy to stop by and give a personal thank you or write out a thank you card, think about that. Think about, better yet, how do you spend your plane rides? Anybody fly here? Anybody have extra thank you cards in their briefcase, pocketbook? Why not write a couple while you're flying? Just think about the last 3 people that have impacted you in the last week, and you just want to say thank you. Write something out. If you don't have a card, put it on a piece of paper. Fold it up. They'll appreciate that. See, I didn't have thank you cards, but here it is. So much better than an email. Right? So much better than email. Go right through the line. Belief. This was about demonstrating belief. So we visibly care, but now we have to demonstrate belief. How do you demonstrate belief to those that you serve? How do you show them that you believe in them? You can't just say, look, this is a big project, but I believe you can get this done. How do you show it? How do you demonstrate belief? That's a tough question, isn't it? But yet, that's what everybody yearns for. Does anybody not yearn for that? Those sitting around the room, when you think about your own boss and what you'd like to see, isn't it good when someone says, you know what, I believe in you, but they also show it? Maybe you drop a big project and you lose $1 million, but they come back and say, here's a $2 million project. Right? Don't worry about the last one. It's like the quarterback that throws the ball to the wide receiver after he just dropped a big pass. Knows he's got to get his head back into the game right away. Right? So you got to get the ball back. So how do you do that? Right? And lastly, how do you show? How do you know that you possess altruistic motives when you're doing something kind for people? How do you really know? What do you gravitate towards? These 3 things is what, in any extraordinary leader that we look at, whether it's in the sports world, professional world, in the music business, doesn't matter. It cuts across all industries, all walks of life. This is what people do. People like Princess Diana, Robin Williams. Robin Williams is a great example of this, right? Showed that he cared by walking around to the homeless people and giving them blankets after every show, right? Because he grew up in some tough ways, and he never forgot the way he grew up. He didn't ask for any cameras, didn't want any cameras around. Nobody even knew he did it. Half the stuff came out after he passed away, after he passed on, right? Altruistic? Absolutely. He didn't want anybody to even know he was doing it. He wasn't looking for the camera, right? The belief that someone like him can care enough to walk these streets that nobody wants to walk and just give blankets and tell them that you too can overcome this. I believe in you. That's pretty cool, right? The question is, how do you back into that in your own organization? What can you do with that? Part of this challenge that we have in leadership comes with the difference between management and leadership. So what's the best definition? What do you think the definition of the separation between manager and leader? This has been a 30-year debate in academia as well. What do you think? What are some things that come to mind?
Manager's task-based. Task-based.
Task-based, absolutely. I agree with that.
Work versus people.
Work versus people. What's the difference?
Action and being. Work is the thing you do. People are
You're right there. That's awesome. I love it. One word that you said I'm going to hang on. One of the best definitions comes from the previous leader of the Girl Scouts in the USA, Frances Hesselbein, one of my favorite. She's now retired, but still does a lot of writing and speaking. Her definition, I think, is one of the best. And what she says is that management is about doing, leadership is about being. Now think about that, being. Such a strong word. But isn't that what it is? It's about being, it's about my behavior, it's about that care and the belief and altruistic motives. It's not about getting the job done and knocking out that project plan, the doing, the working, the results orientation. Leadership is about being. And the question is, who do you need to become to achieve that extraordinary leadership title, that role? Who do you need to become? Do you need to become a better listener? Do you need to become somebody that's more genuine about the work that you do, more purposefully driven, more intentionally driven, right? Spending more time. But it's about being and your behavior. And that's what I love, the combination of being and behavior. Leadership is all about your behavior, right? And that's why you choose to behave certain ways every day or you don't, right? Any questions on that? I think that's one of the best definitions. Anybody disagree with that? Okay. Yes.
I sometimes look at manager versus leader in terms of short-term versus long-term focus.
Okay.
Manager being, maybe that's the whole task orientation versus strategic orientation.
Yes, and I think you're right. I think it could certainly be short-term and long-term. It just depends on what you're working on in the role of leader and what hat that you're wearing. What we do know is that a leader needs to be both, right? That's the most important thing. We are not saying that we should only hire leaders in our organization. I've been privileged to do some work with John Cotter, Changed Leadership, father of Changed Leadership, and I think one of the best out there. And he's done a lot of, probably 20 years of research on this in terms of what does it take to drive projects successfully or to drive change through an organization. And he used to say that it would be about 70% leaders, the act of being, and 30% management to drive change. But he recently, a few years ago, upped that to about 50-50, right? And I think that's a really fair split, that when you're in the role of leading a division or leading a team, there's going to be times that you have to put on your managerial hat, you have to do. You have to just get her done. There's going to be other times that you have to back away purposely and say, today is about the people, or the next hour is about this person sitting in front of me. Right, very intentionally. And that's where I think it just, whether it's short-term or longer-term, strategic could be the act of doing, but it could also be part of your leadership and helping people get to where they want to go long-term, right? So I think the yes and is always in play.
Well, and just one other follow-up point on that. A lot of this conference is focused on innovation.
Yes.
And just an observation, I work in that space, and there's a lot of talk about leaders talking about innovation being very important. But what I see is the pull of the short-term quarterly results really doesn't mesh well with the long-term of what it takes to innovate. And I think that's one of the most challenging parts of leadership.
100%. And we'll talk about that in the last bubble when we get to creativity. Because the question that I always ask, whether I'm in academia or in corporate settings, how many inventions were thought of or executed upon in the dark ages? Did any major breakthroughs come out of that period of time? Right? We can only think of one or two in academia that anything really major happened. Why is that? Well, it goes back to the brain science of where does our brain go when we're under a lot of stress? when we're looking over our shoulder thinking that we're going to get axed in the dark ages, or in an organization that I have played in for many years, for 20 years of corporate world, where you never know when that next layoff's coming. And you're looking over your shoulder to say, is it going to be this week, next year? I don't know. But when that happens, the brain has two functions typically. I'm going to simplify it just to keep you happy and to keep you safe, right, from an evolutionary perspective. So if it feels threatened, if you feel threatened, if you feel like you're going to lose your job, you're not worried about the future, right? Your brain is helping you focus on the here and now. So the very parts of your brain that need to be activated for you to think long term, taken offline. Right? That's one of the reasons why now we're saying to the executive suites, don't all sit together. Don't sit next to the CEO. Because every time he comes in or she comes in your office, your blood pressure goes up. Because you're nervous, you're anxious. Well, that's not helping. That's not helping collaboration or that extra think that you need to do, or that creative think, right? Creativity and brain science, there's so much learning that we found just in the last couple of years. Places like Stanford, Penn, and Harvard. So much is now proven, evidence-based, on what it really requires for us to be creative, and part of that is a stress-free environment. I shouldn't say stress-free, lessened stress, right? A little bit lower stress. We always say stress for success, I get that, but high stress areas, right, not good for creativity at all, right? There's a lot of studies that show, forcing creativity. We will be creative in this meeting. We will find the solution in the next hour. Right? I could put a funny looking helmet on you and see what your brain's doing during that time, and I can guarantee you, right, that your brain is being hijacked not on the creative parts, but on the here and now. Right? So we'll talk a little bit about that. I think that's great insight. I appreciate you sharing that. That's why creativity is so hard. Right? Because we know we have to be creative. So what if you just schedule a half hour on your calendar tomorrow and say, okay, tomorrow for that half hour, I'm going to be creative. What does that mean? How do you get creative? What do you need to do? Well, I can tell you there's a whole toolbox out there that you can tap into the brain science to tell you what to do for that half hour. Right? Quick hit is go run or go do some cardio work 90 minutes before you know you need to be creative. Because there's a gamma burst that we know for some reason pops out about 60 to 90 minutes after. That serves to activate the creative circuits of the brain.
Is that similar to that, like, get in the flow? Like, they talk about like how exercise gets people in the flow and then they're more highly productive. It's the same for activity. Is that related?
Yes, and it kind of does the same thing, but not as a result of, right, the flow. That's a whole, I love flow state. No, but absolutely the most creative. Anybody ever heard of flow, kind of being in that flow state? Sometimes athletes get it where you're just in that zone where you lose all track of time, an activity that you're doing at work, right, that you just don't realize you've been there for 4 hours doing it because you loved being in that. The best science that has come out on the state of flow is that it takes your critical self, your inner self, the one that doubts, offline. And that's one of the reasons why we know that if you're in that state of flow, you will be more creative, because you've taken that risk factor off the table. Doesn't mean that you're going to risk your job on an idea, but it does mean that you're not as critical with your ideas. You're not as afraid to share it with others, right? It may be completely off the wall and you're saying, oh, if I share that, they're going to think I'm a little bit weird. Well, if you're in the state of flow, you just go. You don't even know what you're saying sometimes. But what we know is that study after study is replicated to show that if you're in that flow state, man, you will nail it. Creativity goes sky high. One of the reasons why we know you have to be doing what you love. You can't force creativity if you're not happy with what you're doing. We know that, right? That's one of the reasons why we know also money. You cannot incent through money creativity. You can incent collaboration and thought, but it doesn't get the brain opened up to the point that you're now all of a sudden creative. If you put a $10,000, bonus on the table. Those that are going to solve that $10,000 problem are those that probably don't want the money. They're doing it because they love trying to figure it out. They'll take the money, but they're not doing it for that reason. They just do it for the love. So great question. We can go on and on about that one. All right, presentation skills. Let's go to number 2. This is communication skills. Anybody think communication skills are important as a leader? So why are they, I'm talking about oral skills, the mastery of the oral language and the ability to deliver messages that are inspiring, that influence, that impact those in the audience. Is that important as a leader? Okay, why is that important? Play Captain Obvious here for a second. Why is that important?
It taps into emotion.
Yeah, so it taps into emotion if done well.
Yeah.
If done well, right? And how do we tap into emotion? What's the best way? Oh, you guys attended my session yesterday. Story, right? Is one of the best ways to get that emotion going, right? Absolutely important to get emotion going, and we'll talk about that. So for those that were in the session yesterday, you saw this really quick. This is one of the, as we say, shift gears, shift your mindset when you're thinking about communication. To build mastery, these are the 5 core gears to accelerate your message, to ensure that you can inspire, that you can influence, that you can impact, right? The future, the behavior of others, right? So the idea of building more mastery around story, getting used to bringing in more humor into your presentations, into your speech, that one-liner. You don't have to be the funny person. This does not require you to be the comedian, right? Remember that. Right? When I first started working with Steve Kaplan, he's the father of comedy in Hollywood. It's where everybody goes to learn comedy, right? I was floored to find that he's not a comedian. He's never done stand-up. Like, wow, never thought of that. I just thought you'd be the funny guy. He's like, no, I'm the scholar of it. He knows that going back to the Athenians and the Romans, what makes things funny. He studies shows like Seinfeld, tears it apart so that they can unpackage it and then rebuild it with other shows, right? So you don't have to be the funny person, just be the scholar of it. What makes it funny? All different tools you can use. You can use videos, take a 30-second video clip, we know that, right? You can bring in cartoon characters. You can do improv, which is number 3. Everybody laughs at improv. Anybody taking improv classes? Everybody here should be taking improv classes. That's why Pixar has everybody go through improv training. Doesn't matter if you're a janitor or administrative assistant or a CEO, right? So much good that can come from improv training, right? In terms of emotional regulation, deep breathing, keeping your emotional circuits online when things get crazy in a meeting. That's all improv, right? Thinking quick on your feet. It's not always about being funny though, right? But sometimes it is. People like that, I don't know what's going to happen next type moment. The 4th one I love, part of the shift, is just how do you overcome your fears, right? In order to truly drive an impactful message, you have to be able to give it first. You have to be able to take the stage. Doesn't matter if your stage is your living room floor and you're talking to your kids about don't drink and drive. And that message cannot fail. But you have to take the stage. You have to overcome your fears. Could be in the boardroom, could be at a nonprofit that you're volunteering for. But you have a voice that people want to hear, but you have to overcome those fears to get out there and do it. So there's all sorts of things that you can do to eradicate those fears. Number 1 thing I talk about there is you having a go-to strategy. You heard me talk about that yesterday for those that were in the session. Just pick your fear that you fear the most, something that may happen, whether you're going blank or you trip on stage or you forget where you're at. You feel like you're going to look silly, you won't be able to handle a QA, whatever it is, right? And just what would you do if that were to happen, right? And that's just you keep in your back pocket. Now you're not afraid. If it happens, so what? It happens. I guarantee it's happened to somebody else, no matter what your fear is, guarantee you, including passing out right before you go on stage. It's very common, believe it or not. Literally people just pass out. That's scary, right? It just surpassed number 1 fear, right? Over death is public speaking. I don't know how that can be, but we do fear public speaking. And talent is just the art of improvement. How do you get better at communication? How do you get better at equipping yourself with the tools and capability to deliver impactful messages? It could be a soundbite. It could be a 1-minute message. It could be a 45-minute speech to your team. It could be an inspirational, this is where our company needs to go and you need people to follow you, right? But you have to be able to learn. You have to be able to practice. What is the best way to practice presentation skills? Do it. Love it, right? Exposure strategy, right? Exposure. Just bring yourself to it. It could start with a 1-minute. It could start with a 5-minute. It could start with a 30-second. Start raising your hand. Anytime somebody says we need someone to present, boom, what am I presenting? Uh-oh, right? One of those things. But raise your hand. Get out there and do it. Keep it safe. Join clubs where it's safe. It doesn't have to be at work, right? Start practicing at home, right? But you have to get out there and do it. It's the only way to overcome your fear. Remember, as you're communicating, whether it's on your team, whether it's in the boardroom, nonprofit, community, it's about showing, not just telling. We tend to get behind the podium and we just want to tell the story, we want to be able to tell the message. It's about showing. We get engaged with show as part of the improv training. But you have to show what you're doing. You have to show your story at all costs, right? Number one thing we can do to drive emotions. And the last part of this is what I love. This is part about being the director of the show, something I learned directly from Hollywood, and I incorporated it right into the presentation skills that we train. You are the director of the show, right? It's your show, it's your message, it's your meeting, it's your presentation. You have to direct, just like you would in Hollywood if you're directing a movie. What do you direct? Two things. You have to control the flow of the content. Right? When you're communicating, especially orally, how much do you give? How little do you give? Is it just a soundbite? Is it not? Right? You have to control that. Right? Do you just dribble that in? Do you do it over 4 weeks instead of one big 2-hour meeting? Do you just take a half hour a week? Right? That's controlling the flow of content. The flow of emotions. Right? How do you direct the flow of emotions? For every slide, if I'm coaching, working with a client, I'll ask, what is this slide meant to do? Not tell me, I don't want to read bullet points. What type of emotion am I supposed to feel when I see this slide, when I see this picture, when I see something dancing across the screen? Right? Animation and moving objects has been scientifically proven to be really difficult for audiences to comprehend what you're saying when they're watching something moving. So the more fancy we get with our slides, sometimes the less our audience hears, right? So keeping it simple, and that's part of the emotions. If I throw up a picture of a little baby, I can get tons of oohs and ahs around the world. Doesn't matter what country I'm in. There's something about infants that we love as human beings, right? It just melts us, right? But there's certain places that just doesn't work, such as at St. Jude Hospital. Sometimes that's a tough message when we're dealing with sick children, right? I have to know what emotion I want to drive, right? With every slide. You have to be purposeful in what you do. So you have to direct the flow of emotions, right? We know the opening and the closing are the most important. It's the last soundbite I'm going to leave with you. Opening and closing your presentation. Open with emotion. Open with a strong story. Close with a strong story. Closing is one of the most important. We talked yesterday a little bit about movies. Have you ever watched a movie that it ended in a place that just left you hanging? Right? And it ruined the whole movie. It's like, really? That's the end? Right? Well, sometimes presentations do that too. Hollywood spends a lot of money refilming the last 30 seconds of films based upon the first set of trial runs. Right? Pretty Woman, right? Anybody seen that movie, right? With Julia Roberts, right? How does it end? Does anybody remember? Yeah, right? I mean, how cool is that? It's like your manly man's climbing, you're getting up there to save the girl, and the girl wants to be rescued. But it didn't always end that way. The original ending, one of them anyhow, was just leaving the money and driving away. Audience hated it. Killed the whole movie. Why? It's a movie. It's make-believe. Why did they spend millions of dollars redoing that 30-second? Why do you think? Why wouldn't they just leave it that way and say, who cares?
I was in your presentation yesterday, and something came to me, Gone with the Wind. Has that ending, I don't give a damn, and he walks out, right?
Perfect.
And the author purposely would not write another book to what happened between Rhett and Scarlett.
That's right.
So, and Hollywood left it like that.
Yep. Absolutely. They did, didn't they?
Comment on that one?
Yeah, we got tons of comments. That's what we study in Hollywood.
Gone with the Wind, like how can it end like that?
Yes, sometimes purposely done, right? Because we want to have the sequel, because we know you're yearning for that. Sometimes in presentations there are no sequels though, so we have to be careful of how we end. Often it is that cliffhanger because it gets people talking. You know, and the challenge I think for most writers and screenwriters in Hollywood in the studios, it's how much of a emotional negative does it create. So it's one thing to say, I'm curious how that's going to go. The Breakup. Anybody see that movie? With Vaughn, is it Vince? The Breakup, right? Yeah, yeah, with Jennifer Aniston. And is anybody, did you see the ending of that? Anybody see the ending of that? When they're walking down the street, right? Well, the original ending was they walk down the street. I mean, the movie, the premise was about just, you know, love, hate, love, hate, love, hate. They're going to get together or not. The whole movie, you're trying to pull them together. You're hoping they're going to get together. But then at the end, they meet on the street after being, you know, separated a little bit. And the original ending was that they meet and then they just go their separate ways. And it left you hanging. Spend millions of dollars to come in and rewrite that and refilm it. And this time, they met on the street, but they smiled at each other. That's all they did. And then they walked away. World of difference, right? So one still leaves you a little bit hanging, like, geez, I wonder, but that smile, right? Like my wife's saying, I know they're going to get back together. I said, hon, you do know this is make-believe, right? It's not, you know, it's not real, but that smile, it's like, it feels good. It's like, all right, that's it. That's what I needed to see. After 2 hours of watching this movie, they're going to make it, right? We cheer them on, right? Same thing for your presentation, right? Leaving them strong enough to feel inspired at the end. And Gone with the Wind's a great example of that, that sometimes it can work, even though it's bucking the trend of what you would sometimes want to do. More and more movies are doing it, by the way. I see more and more movies that have an ending that still leaves me hanging, and I don't think it's for sequel purposes. It's like they just ran out of budget money. And I was like, okay, they just got tired of it. Let's just get it done, get to the next project. That's not really how it works, but that's what it feels like sometimes. Okay. Yes.
I think it's really important, and I think it's really important. Don't ever apologize in a presentation. I just came from a track, and it's four executives up there, and one of the women on the panel, she was the last one to answer a question, and she opened her mouth and said, well, I'm not sure I have anything to add after my colleague spoke. Or I'll hear young women get up and say, I'm sorry, this is so much of an art chart. And it's like, whatever it is that you're presenting, own it, and don't apologize. Because if you don't have faith in what is about to come out of your mouth, why should I?
Yeah.
And it's a really important thing, I think, to remember.
It is, and we could spend a whole day unpackaging that very comment, and I appreciate that, because it's the art behind the science of it. Sometimes we do have to be careful what we say, but we have to have confidence in what we say. I like to just coach to the fact that we can use what I call bridge statements, a bridging comment before we get into that statement that may say, hey, this may be coming out of left field, but let me just share something. Well, that's my way of overcoming that fear that if I say it, it could come out of left field. They may think I'm odd. Well, I'm going to call it out. Say, look, this may be the oddest thing you've heard, but let me just share this. So we can still leave with a statement, but we can bridge it a little bit to make ourselves feel a little bit better so that we have confidence to say it, right? Because oftentimes we go inward and we just don't say it, right? And that's part of the challenge there. So change leadership, just two things I'll talk about this. This is a big topic. Anybody deal with change? Right, everybody deals with change. Very few people are really trained on it. First thing I say is when you're asked to go through a door of the unknown, the question is, what do you follow? Do you follow the leader or the message? What do you follow? You have this door, you're not sure if you can walk into the future or not. Do you follow the leader or do you follow the message? Most everybody will follow the leader, not the message. So I could leave you with an inspiring rah-rah speech that gets you to want to go through that door. But if I'm not behaving in a manner that's aligned to that, you're going to say, no way I'm going into that firefight. No way I'm going to support you there. No way I'm going to go into that project with you. We follow the leader. So therefore, that's where servant leadership trumps change leadership. People want to follow their leader, right? Not the message. That's where you have to put those servant leadership kind of deposits in the bank along the way. And also this idea of getting stuck. Anybody ever feel stuck in change? It's like you can't get movement. You want the team to go in a certain direction. You want the company to go in a certain direction. You can't get it. It's one of the common things that I'm asked to come in and do. For 2 years, we've been trying to move in this direction. Can't get anybody to move, right? Well, the question they're asking is, why is everybody resisting, right? And what I say is, the question is not about resistance. The question is, what do they fear as a result of the change? Now, that's a simple mindset reset. Very common sense, but not common practice, right? We get stuck on, why are they resisting? Why don't they want to do this? They know their job's on the line. They know they're not going to get bonused, right? We put all this money on the line. They just do it, we're going to give them a bonus. They still don't do it. Why? Because of fear. Remember, brain. The brain keeps us safe and happy. Safe is the fear. If the brain is saying, wow, that's unsafe, they're going in a direction that you don't have the skills for, you could lose your job, guess what? I'm going to have a tough time following. Right? Your job is to uncover the fear. Turn the light on. Right? Look for the boogeyman under the bed, as we do for the kids. Right? That's what change leadership is all about. Turn the light on. High-performing team. Fourth component I think is critical. Anybody get trained on how to build a high-performing team? Do you feel like it was good training? Do you feel like you have the tools, the skills, the resources to build a high-performing team anytime you want? Yeah, somewhat. That's a good answer. I mean, because we don't know, right? It's the art behind the science. I've been privileged to work with some of the elite military, and I can tell you they know how to build a high-performing team. Why? Because their life's on the line, right? Number one thing that they always tell me they're looking for is accountability in their teammates, right? That's a common sense. Captain Obvious comment. Of course we need accountability. The challenge is, how do you get there? Because everyone just says, well, you have to be accountable for what you're supposed to do and everybody will be happy. Doesn't always work that way for a simple reason, which goes back to Patrick Lencioni, the author of The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. I think one of the best out there, 20, 25 years, possibly 30. He's been out there studying teams, you know, these 5 pillars, these 5 dysfunctions. It starts with trust. If you don't have trust, you won't have conflict. You need conflict on a high-performing team, right? If there's no trust, you're not going to debate. If you don't debate, you get no communication with each other. It takes weigh in for buy-in. Right? I'm okay going in a certain direction as long as I have the opportunity to weigh in. Right? I at least want to weigh into that, even if you go in a different direction. Well, if I don't have trust in my leader and I can't have conflict, then I probably won't weigh into that. Now all of a sudden you hit accountability with the end being results. So if your team needs accountability, you can't just say be accountable. You have to start with trust. Vulnerability-based trust. That's the most important part. And how often do you intentionally build vulnerability-based trust? Not, are you going to send me the email by 9 o'clock? We're talking about, I'm sharing personal things, maybe a life crucible about my life that shaped me, made me who I am, things I don't want you going out there sharing with the world. Can I leave it with you and know it's not going to go anywhere else? Right? That's what the elite military teams do all day long. What stays in that theater of operation, what goes on stays there. It never comes back. Somebody breaks down and just breaks down crying in the middle of it. Nobody talks about that. They go, they pick them up because they know that's real. It's human, right? There's that vulnerability-based trust. That's why building a hybrid team is so difficult right there. Think about those 5 things. How often do you intentionally do that? Right? Most companies don't, yet they strive for a high-performing team. When it comes to a high-performing team, I'll just part with this final thought on this. It is about the name on the front of your jersey, not the back. You always have to play for the name on your front of your jersey, not your back, if you want to be part of a high-performing team. This is an example. Anybody know this example from Chicago quite many years ago, right? In championship, one of the championship games. End of the game, they had a chance to, one last chance to win. Coach called a timeout, got all the players together. Scottie Pippen on the left there was playing with Michael Jordan, but Pippen was an all-star at the time. And something started happening where they started realizing that as they were breaking from this little breakout, getting back on the court, Pippen was on the bench. And everyone was like, wow, is he hurt? Is he not? Why is he not coming on? He doesn't look hurt. They didn't know what was going on. They ended up making the shot, but he was left on the bench. Only later did it come out that he said this: I want the ball, and if I don't get it, I'm not going in. I paraphrased that. But what did he do? He played for the name on the back of his jersey, not his front. Right? That was a moment in time that's a tough one. Right? It's a tough one to swallow. And how many of us get into that situation where we play for the name on our back? We want that promotion. We want that credibility. We want that one opportunity to shine above the team, even though we don't want to admit to it. Right? Being part of a team requires us to always play for the name on the front of our jersey, not our back. Last, just creativity. We've already talked about that. This is the ability to think different. This session is all about think different, right? But what are those tools that get into it? How do we think different? I love this sign. Across the street from a cemetery. Right? That's cool. That's think different. I love that. One of the biggest challenges facing corporations, the biggest challenges is how do we keep food from disappearing in the refrigerator? Right? I mean, like there's signs in everywhere, all around the world, no matter what country, there's signs put up, only eat your food. It's like, really? That's what we're dealing with in the executive suites. That's not good, right? Until you find this creation. You build a little plastic bag that looks like it has mold on it. Nobody touches your sandwich anymore. Right? That's think different. That's so cool. I love it, right? But it is about change. It's about a purposeful change in design so you don't end up like this. No time to listen, and yet, right, the salesman is really trying to help him out to fight that battle, and yet we're too busy doing, not being, right, in leadership, as we say. So therefore, the creativity, what I will leave you with is the personality. What type of personalities drive creativity? What type of personality traits? Let's just say introvert or extrovert. Any. So the yes and. What does science tell us? Who tends to be more creative on average, introverts or extroverts? Introverts, by a high percentage. Doesn't mean that extroverts are not creative, but there's now brain science to prove why. We know that from looking at personality traits of creatives, and if you look at this list, some of the high personality traits that drive creativity, you may not be surprised, but ego strength, somebody that's really ego strength based, right? High creativity. But look at things like assertiveness. Those that are assertive are more creative. Interesting. I love this. How many times does your business model look for aloof people? To say, we really need to hire some more people that are just aloof, they're just out of it, right? That are hostile. We want hostile people in this organization because we need to be more creative, right? We need people that don't like talking to other people. We want introverts, right? Well, there's a reason for all this, right? And one of the best things that's coming out with teams is that teammates don't have to be the same. You can hire people and say, look, I need to put you in the corner so you don't do damage to relationships, but I need you to be creative. And they don't want to talk to people anyhow, right? So how do you play to their strengths? It doesn't mean you don't bring them into your organization. It's how do you protect them, right? Because they are a little bit different, but they can be a huge part of your team, right? That's the kind of stuff that requires us to think different about who we bring in, right? Now, the brain science that I leave you with is this. Aha moment. We all heard of that, right? Aha moment. You get that burst of sudden insight. You're driving down the road, you're in the shower, just something that pops out of nowhere, right? You know what I mean about that, right? Well, we know that you only get that burst, you only feel that if your brain is quiet. If you're an extrovert and you tend to be always talking, always moving, always doing, that activity in the prefrontal cortex shuts down that gamma burst, that cortisol burst, right? That chemical burst, you don't feel it. So although the unconscious mind, as we say, is trying to push that aha moment up to you, you're not getting it. Think about that. Now I'm making that really simplistic, but you're literally not getting that aha moment because this part of the brain is shutting it down. Right? That's really cool science. It tells us whether you're an introvert or extrovert, it doesn't matter. You need quiet time. If you want to be creative, the number one thing you can do when you leave here is get quiet time. Intentional time that you just get to yourself. You walk around the block. You walk around your corporate building. Right? You go out for a drive on a highway, you turn off the radio and you just think. Not about problems. You just think. Quiet your mind. Right? Number one way to get that aha moment, right, is just quiet your mind, right? Any questions on that?
Is it fair to say that's like mindfulness or meditating or things that?
It is. One of the challenges, though, with that from a science base is that we tend to focus a little bit on the negatives as human beings. So when we tend to meditate on the negatives and we can't get it out of your mind, right? So it's like if I were to say, whatever you do, don't think of the color blue, don't think of the blue sky, don't think of the blue up there, just don't think of the color blue, right? Eventually, you're really fighting that off, aren't you? It's like your unconscious is fighting against you. That's what happens in a lot of the programs where you're trying to just meditate, right? You just ruminate on the negative and you can't stop it. The more you, yes, yeah, and that's why you got to be careful. There's so many different offshoots of meditation. Some of them are better than others for that. Well, that was certainly a round robin of time. So again, this is stuff that can be unpackaged over years and years in terms of building mastery. But I hope that all of you got one insight, something that you can walk out of here with, that you can easily mobilize or actionize. Get out there and do something to get back to this idea of being an extraordinary leader, one based on many different aspects, but certainly of these 5, whether it's the care, belief, and altruistic model, whether it's taking your communication skills to another level, whether it's change leadership and understanding that you have to be the change, that you have to follow, the person, not the message, that building a high-performance team, playing for the name on the front of your jersey, not your back. How well do you do that? And creativity. Do you quiet your mind enough, right? Do you purposely take time, right? The question is, who do you need to become to achieve extraordinary leadership status, right? You can do it. It's within you. We know that. Have fun in the journey. It'll be a 20-year journey. So thank you for coming. I appreciate it. I'm here for questions if you have any. I know we're running out on time, so we'll let people go, but I'll be hanging around if you have any questions. So thank you very much.